Good morning. Okay, let's go. So we're up to Siman Lamed Beis Halacha Tes Zayin. Siman Lamed Beis Halacha Tes Zayin. So we're talking about problems in the klaf of the Tefillin, and the Mechaber continues. Nifsak achas meha oisius. So there's a break in one of the oisius. In other words, the ink in one of the letters in your Tefillin has been erased. Says the Ramah, Hapshutois, one of the letters, the straight letters. Now, there's not like a base or an aleph, a complicated letter, but imagine a vav or a final nun or something like that. So Hapshutos, he says, could go in vav or a zayin, or shenifsak regel a hanun, or the foot of a nun, of a final nun, v'chiyetziba. Im tinoik, what's the halacha? Im tinoik she'ena leichachim v'leitipesh. If you have an average child, not too clever, not too silly, yodei alik kroise, if he's still able to read that letter, kasha, then it's the tefillin a kasha. V'im lav pasol, v'ein tzarich lechases leishar oisios k'moshe nagim. You don't have to cover the letters, just to exclude all the bits around it. K'moshe nagim. You don't need to do that. Says the Ramah, miu imanurayim shenishat tzuras ha'ois k'tikuna. But if we see that the letter hasn't got a tzura of the ois, it doesn't look like that particular letter, then pasal afal pishat tinok koreso kilchasei. Then it's possible, even if the tinok happens to be able to read it, then that doesn't help. It doesn't make a difference. Okay, and fine. Okay, let's do the Ramot, the Mishnah Berurah till there. Nifsak. Yesh lefarish b'shnei ofanim. In Mishnah Berurah Sif Kotan Memhei. You can explain this in one of two ways. Oimach mas nekev. Either there's a hole in the actual parchment, in the klaf. V'zeh ein kosher ki im b'nekev achakach. Now that's only going to be kosher if the nekev came about after the word was written. As we're going to say soon. Or the ink came away in that place. And that would be true even if the initial writing was like that. Memvov hapshutos, the letters which are posh, he says the nun, the zayin, the vav, the zayin, etc. I mean, imagine you scrape off the bottom of a vav, then what are you left with? The image looks like a yud, right? Imagine you got a letter vav, and you scrape away the bottom, that looks like a yud. So hapshutos yud. The other rabbi, on the contrary, nearest kayud or posel, it looks like a yud, and therefore it's posel. Therefore you need the child to be able to read it, and he'll tell you whether it looks like a vav or a yud or whatever the case is. Sifkat mem zayin, oisha nifsel regel hanun. Or imagine you've got a nun, a final nun, and therefore it's a long nun. Then kach tzarich lema or peirushay nun pshuta. In other words, a final nun where the nun comes straight down. Or kiyetziba going kaf pshuta sheragla katzara. You got a final chof where the regel is shorter because the bottom has been scraped away. V'doime lektsas ledalet or lereish. Yeah, so you've got all these problems where the final chof. Imagine the final chof, and then you scrape away the bottom. It looks like a dalet or perhaps a reish. So then we bring the tinok in, and we see whether or not he can read it. So says the Mishnah Berurah Memches im tinok, ayim betaz shekosav. Dahach nifsach mayri shenifsach ksas mi oirech ha'ois or lemata legamrei. That the bottom little section of that letter has been taken away fully. V'lo nishar imenu rak ha'chelek shekoidem ha'hefsek. And just the bit before the hefsek is left. Oz tol b'kriyas ha'tinok. Then it depends on the reading of the child. Im sofek lonim nishar kashir shel ha'ois hahu. If we're unsure whether or not the enough has remained from that letter. But if a bit below the hefsek, imagine you've got the long nun, and a bit scraped away, and then you've got the continuation of the nun underneath it. And it continues below that. In that situation, having a child read it for you doesn't help. Because the kid is inevitably going to join up what's underneath the little gap to what's above it. Or be'emes ein lo tziruf. And in halacha, you can't combine the two, so therefore it's cheating. The kid is not going to help you. V'zeh doimel lenifsak regel ha'alef. It's like when the regel of the aleph, remember the aleph is made like a vav and two yuds. Right? It's doimel lenifsak regel ha'alef, and therefore it doesn't help. And l'tzorich lechasois es chelek hanisha acha hefsek. So what do? You cover over the bottom bit, which is beneath the hefsek, because then the child won't be able to see that part, and that will give him a clue as to what the letter is. And this is not the same as what the Shulchan Aruch writes over here. You don't have to cover the other letters. Because here he definitely says you would need to cover it. And that's the conclusion of the Achronim. And not like the Yeshua Yaakov says that you can be makel like the Shitta of the Me'iri. We don't combine the bits of the letter which is underneath the gap, because that will give you too much of a clue, because in halacha you can't combine those together. Okay. Now who do we pick? We pick a child who is not too clever and not a tipesh. Says the Mishnah Berurah Memtes, Lo chacham, hainu chacham kol kach shemevin ha'inyan. He understands. He's been to the Dirshu Shiurim and he knows the whole sugya. We don't pick a child like that. And he'll explain it all very well. Not chacham meaning that he knows his aleph base very well. And then he doesn't know what's written before it, so he can get clues for the letters before it that will help him read. So we don't need that. That's the definition of chacham, who knows the sugya properly. Velo tipesh, and is not too silly. Tipesh hanu she'en yodeh likros osios, i.e., he's not able to read the osios. V'chol she'yodeh likros osios, any child who's able to read the letters, afagav de'ena baki kol kach b'tzuros osios, but is not so expert in all the shapes of the letters. Kol she'omer de'en b'tzuros osios pasalu. If he says, this child says that this is not the tzur, this is not a reish, this is not a whatever it is, then pasal, that letter is pasal, and he will render the tefillin pasal. So the Mishnah Berurah, the Ramah says, ein tzorech lechasos. This is going on Nun Aleph. Sorry, it's going on the Mechaba. Ve'ein tzorech lechasos leishar oisius k'moshe nagim. Now, what does that mean? Says the Mishnah Berurah, v'chein kosav levush aval amogan avram b'shem ma'aritz kosav tzorech lechasos mashe lefonov. So imagine you've got some letters. Here's an example of it. You've got here hazacharim v'chol buchar. Yeah, can you see that? You've got the letters there. He's going to get a clue of what that word is because he's got the narrative beforehand. So therefore, according to that, he's saying cover up that bit beforehand so he doesn't get that clue as to what the rest of the word is going to be. You don't have to cover up the rest of it, just the bit before it. That's what the machlokas is here. So it says the Mishnah Berurah in Nun Aleph, v'chein kosav halavush, aval hamogan avram b'shem ma'arit kosav t'tzorich lechasos mashe lefonov. Contrary to what the Mechaba says, there are those poskim who say that you do need to cover up the words which come before. Shem yaschem etchilas hamikra, sarchi noch kedvazo. If he sees the beginning words, he'll just sort of read through and he'll be able to get an unfair clue. Even a child is not up to there in Chumash yet, and he hasn't learned that parsha. You still have to cover up the bit before it up to this word. But no one says that you have to cover up the bit which is ahead of it, the next bit. Okay, Nun Beis, this is the Ramah. Miu Imanuroim, the Ramah says, if we see that this has not got the shape of that particular letter, then it's possible regardless of what the child reads. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Kogoin, Alfin, like an Aleph, She'en hayud shelohen negas al atzmon. So we know that the Aleph is made up of a Vov, and then two Yuds, if you can imagine it. So if you've got an Aleph, which She'en hayud shelohen negas al atzmon, that the Yud of the Aleph, the two bits, are not connected to the main body of the Aleph, v'chein nekudas hapei she'ein negas legago. So imagine a pei. He's got it here. It's this picture over here. The pei. Can you see it? The pei is, you've got the chaf, as it were, and then you've got like an upside down yud at the top. but it's disconnected from the top. So that breaks the tzura of the pei. Yeah. So the letters are amazing. They're all other letters made up. It's lots of little letters made up into the form the bigger letters. The pei is not touching the roof. Whether it happens at the time of writing or it came about later, the child reading it, that doesn't help you. Only when there's a break in the letter, or the question is, if there's a little break at the bottom of the vav, and does it look like a yud, does it look like a vav, then you get the tinuk to come along and read it. And perhaps it looks like a lois acher. It looks perhaps like a different letter. Kagoin vav katia, the example I gave. The vav, the bottom is chopped off, and is that a vav or is that a yud? That's when the reading of the child is going to help me. That it's got the length of a vav and it's not a yud. So to a nun, imagine a final nun which comes all the way down, the kaf pshuta and a final chaf. Is it long enough that it looks like a final nun or a final chaf? The chaf, yeah. Is it too squared? It looks like a base. Those sort of questions. Does this look like a different letter? But where we see that the ois is not like the letter we thought it was, how does it help us if a child looks at it? We see that the letter is not what it looks like, what it should be. And therefore, if the yud of the aleph, do you understand what I mean by the yud of the aleph? You've got the vav of the aleph going across, and you've got the yud on either side. If that yud doesn't touch the main body, the middle line, he will misread it. So in these sort of psulim, it won't help what a child can read or can't read. So just to summarize what we've said so far, that when do we bring the child to look at the sefer? When does that help? If we're not sure if that vav, the bottom of the vav which has been chopped off, the ink has come away or whatever it may be, if it looks like a vav or does it look like a yud? So then you bring the child. But if we see that hasn't got the tzura, then we don't bother bringing a child. So for example, if the yud has become detached, the two little bits of the aleph has become detached from the main body, or the pei, it looks like a chof, and then there's the yud coming down, which forms the pei, has been detached from the roof of the pei, then we don't even need the child, we can puzzle it without bringing the child. Do you have a question?
Can't you just add like a drop of ink to make it look like...
We're going to talk about tikkunim. Very good question. We're going to talk about how to fix things up a little later on. In fact, there's time still to do the rest of this sif. Okay, let's carry on the mechaber. Now, hod machshirin, that which we say that it's kosher, kashenifsak ois, when there's a break in the letter, dafka mishenichtav bekashrus. That's only when it was initially written and it was kosher, v'achkach nifsak, and it later, the ink faded away. But if when the sofa originally wrote it, there was a hole, and then it became separated, became detached in some way. Imagine the bottom line of the klaf. It went right to the end. In other words, you've always got to have a bit of parchment around the ois. But if the sofa did it right to the bottom and he never left a bit of border around it, then that would be possible. Okay, that's the end of this sif. Let's just do the Mishnah Berurah on that part. Kashanifsaka ois, says the Mishnah Berurah in Nun Gimel. V'hu adin madamachshir le'el b'sif tezvov im nekev regel ha'hei, avol b'nekev chalolo, we said in the foot of the hay there is a hole, but if there is a hole in the middle bit, not in the actual letter, but in the middle of the letter of the hay, between the two sides of the hay, When the Mechaber previously said that was okay, there, if the hole came about even before he wrote it, that would be okay. That was only regarding to the later bits of that section. Okay, here we're talking about there's a hole in the actual letter. Where the requirements of needing some border around it at the time of writing, even if the nekev goes from one letter to the next letter which is next to it, gam kein kosher. The Derech Chaim says Behilchas Kriyas HaTorah Bedin Boy Machne Bezeh. His machme when it comes to Kriyas HaTorah. V'ayim beber halacha. V'da'oid the bo'inan in negias ha'osis afilum yodeh bebira shenasel achaksiva. Even if we know that it happened after the writing, gam came posel, and he's quoting there the Derech Chaim Sham v'chein masham beis Shmuel be'eben ha'ez b'simen kuf chafef sif kotten chaftes ayin sham desvirle the gam kein sorech lochush letiretz rishon beis Yosef v'diva maschel v'im taimar de'in machalik b'negia beinim lo yukuf be'ez haksiva ayach. Okay, Sif Cotton Nun Hey Mitchila Besofik Mosai Nas Sanekiv. Now, if you're not sure, when did this hole come about? If it was there before the writing, you've got a problem. If it came about afterwards, then you're okay. So, what if you don't know? So, says the Mishnah Berurah in Sif Cotton Nun Hey Toilin Da'acha Ksiva Naseh. We assume that it came about afterwards. Why? Because if it was there at the time of the writing, the sofer would see that there's a hole in his cloth and he would sort it out then. Unless it was tiny. Nunvov, nekev, dafka nekev oikra, dafka a hole or a tear, even though the hefsek, the break is not clear, or mishum delohaya mukav kvil beis haksiva, because it wasn't mukav kvil at the time of writing. Aval hefsek ba'alma kosher, ve'ein tzorech shum tikkun, doesn't need to be repaired. Kimen sheyesh shir oid ois ad mokum hahu uchadil el basif tesvov tetesayin. Venus esritas dakas b'tzeich shir ois ayim behaloch, if there's little sort of scratches in very small within the letter. We said that the foot's a bit thinner than it would be. Check out the Bir Halacha. Okay, Regel. What was that going on? Nun Zayin. This is going in the Mechaber. Regel HaKof HaPshuta, the foot of the Chof. The Cholshken Gagi Hoisis, and so much more so if we're talking about the roofs of the letters, Ve'em Tzon, and the middle parts, She'ein Loim Hekav Kvil, where there is no boards around them, Be'ez HaKsiva, that's a problem. For Nokat Regel, Lirvusan is telling me even on the foot there needs to be some border, some parchment, some clear parchment underneath the foot of the letter. After Be'ez HaKsiva, Sofa Regel Kva Nigmat Tzuras Ha'ez Karo, even though by the shape of the letter has been completed fully. So long as you haven't moved your hand away from the letter, and you need a border all the way around it. Even if the nun was as long as it should be, if you haven't got the gvil, the muk of gvil around it, it's a apostle. But if the cloth cuts away, and that's why it's not muk of kvil, that's okay. Yeah, can you see that? Imagine the nun is at the bottom of the cloth. The little bit of the parchment has come away. That was muk of kvil, but there was a little tear at the bottom of the parchment. That would actually be okay. But if we said that if he wrote it without some sort of boards around it, then it would be possible. Now, you want to talk about fixing it up. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Sifkat and Samach, possible. If you want to fix it, yigarer ktsas, you scrape away a bit of the bottom of the nun. Kadeshi muk of kvil. That way you've got some border, some parchment all the way around your letter. Avul now, but that's one way of fixing it. You scrape away the bottom. Avul dibuk matlis. But what if you take a little bit of parchment and you stick it on underneath it? Right? Avul dibuk matlis. You stick a bit of parchment underneath it to give you some border around it. Lo mahanil hakofas kvil. That doesn't help you to give you some border. To boinin hakofas kvil miguf has sefer Torah or mezuzah. You need it from the actual body of the parchment and not something which was attached on later. Okay, Peseda, we'll leave it there.